The fog of London has always carried whispers, curling through the gas-lit streets like a silent messenger of secrets never told. On nights when the air grew so thick you could barely see the lamps across Baker Street, I often felt the pulse of the city quicken, as though something unseen stirred within its shadows. It was on such a night that I first heard Holmes speak of the copper mask. The object itself, he said, was less interesting than the trail of sadness it had left across the continent. A relic of ancient craft, whispered about in salons and hinted at in the darker corners of the press, but rarely spoken of openly. To Holmes it was not the mask's legend that interested him, but the strange sequence of human foolishness and terror that clung to it, like soot to a chimney flue. Even before I saw it, before I could weigh its weight in my own hands, I knew that this case would press upon us with a seriousness I had not felt since our darkest hours together. For in the gleam of that copper surface, I sensed that more than a single crime or mystery was hidden, something older, stranger, and much more dangerous. If you find yourself drawn into this tale as we unravel it, I ask only this: allow our journey together to continue by lending your support. Share this story with those who delight in shadow and deduction, and subscribe so you may not miss what lies beyond the next fog-bound turning. The case of the copper mask is not merely a story. It is an unfolding darkness that demands witness. It was upon a grey and mist-covered morning that the parcel first came into our rooms at Baker Street. I remember it well, for the fog had rolled thickly from the Thames and pressed against the window panes in heavy folds, blurring the outlines of carriages rattling past below. Mrs. Hudson herself brought the package into our sitting room, her hands unusually careful, as though she sensed the unease it carried. The address, written in a firm but unfamiliar hand, was to Holmes directly. No return, no seal, no postmark, beyond a smudged impression from the General London sorting office. Holmes, who had been relaxing in his dressing gown with the morning paper, shifted at once to an alert position the moment his eyes fell upon the object. He did not touch it immediately, but circled the small square package with the careful curiosity of a hound scenting new game. "Curious," he murmured, "very curious." He tilted his head, listening not to the foghorns moaning in the distance, but to some instinct that whispered within him. I, watching from my chair by the fire, could not rid myself of the idea that the air itself had grown colder when the parcel entered our chambers. From whom could it have come? I asked. A client, perhaps. Yet the absence of a card or letter seemed to me a bad sign. Holmes laid a long finger upon the string, his eyes narrowing. No ordinary client would send such a gift without introduction, he said, and no common criminal would place it in the care of the post, knowing full well that Scotland Yard intercepts packages with ease. This, Watson, has all the marks of an intent that wishes to be noticed but not known. With that he drew his penknife, slicing the string in a swift, precise motion. The paper fell away, revealing a strong wooden box, dark with age and scarred by handling. It had no lock, yet the lid creaked with reluctance as Holmes lifted it. Inside, cushioned by straw and rough cloth, lay an object that seemed at once both ordinary and dreadful. A mask of copper, shaped crudely to the form of a human face. Its eye sockets hollow, its mouth slightly open. The surface was spotted with green rust, yet in the glow of our hearth it caught the light in a way strangely alive, as though some pulse lay beneath the metal. Holmes leaned closer, and I could see his reflection warped in its sheen. The sharp features of his face stretched into strange angles. He said nothing for a long while, though the ticking of the mantel clock seemed louder in the silence. I confess I felt a chill that no fire could banish, for something in that empty gaze gave me the sensation of being studied, not by empty metal, but by a presence veiled within. "It is copper," Holmes said at last, his tone measured, yet not of any mixture I have encountered in the ordinary course of metalworking. "Note the irregularities upon its surface, Watson. Scratches that are neither the marks of tool nor of accident. They are deliberate." He traced a line with his finger, revealing faint inscriptions that had lain hidden beneath the green layer. A code, perhaps, or a ritual marking. I leaned in, struck by the precision of the lines. They seemed almost too fine for human workmanship, delicate as if etched by some tool beyond common craft. "But why should it be sent to you?" I asked. Holmes replaced the mask within its box, closing the lid with care. "That, my dear fellow, is precisely the riddle. The sender seeks my attention, yet denies me any introduction. There is challenge here. Yes, and danger too. He struck a match, lighting his pipe with a sudden flame that threw the room into flickering shadow. The game has begun before we have even met the player. As the smoke curled into the thickening air, I could not shake the feeling that with the arrival of that mask, something vast and unseen had crossed our threshold. The city outside groaned with its usual life. Vendors calling, wheels clattering, children laughing in the street. But within our sitting room a silence had settled, heavy and full of warning. The copper mask had come to Baker Street, and in its mute and gleaming face I felt the promise of a trial more dangerous than either of us could yet imagine. The hours that followed its arrival were filled with a strange tension. Holmes did not set the mask aside, as he often would with unimportant things brought to him, nor did he allow it to remain in its box unattended. He placed it upon the mantel beneath the portrait of the French chemist, where its copper face seemed to brood over the room like an unwanted guest. I confess I found it difficult to read the morning paper, with that empty gaze fixed upon me. More than once I caught myself turning my chair as though to escape its silent stare. Holmes, meanwhile, busied himself with a variety of small experiments. He held the mask beneath the glass of his magnifying lens, tapping gently at its surface with a steel rod, listening for vibrations as though the metal might answer him. He sprinkled it with chemicals from his chemical table, the fumes curling upward in sharp spirals. At each attempt he frowned, not in frustration, but in the manner of a man whose expectations had been unsettled. "It does not behave as copper ought to behave," he muttered. "See here, the acid darkens it not, and yet it resists magnetism with a stubbornness that is most extraordinary. There is composition here not known to the common market." I could not help but recall tales I had once heard, among military surgeons of Eastern artifacts, charms and masks brought back by officers who swore they carried some evil influence. It seemed foolish to believe such superstition. Yet the longer I sat in the presence of that object, the more uneasy I became. "Holmes," I ventured, "do you suppose there is harm in keeping it here? I would almost say the thing places a weight upon the very air." He looked up sharply, his keen grey eyes flashing. "You feel it too, good. That tells me we are not dealing merely with fanciful impression. Objects, Watson, may indeed gather power, not mystical but mental. The dread it inspires may be as powerful as any weapon in a villain's hand. That it was delivered here unannounced speaks to a mind familiar with such effects." At that moment there came a knock upon our door, and Mrs. Hudson entered once more bearing a telegram upon a tray. Holmes seized it, tore open the envelope, and read aloud in clipped tones. "Mask must be returned at once. Grave danger attends. Midnight appointment to be made known. Until then, trust no one." The signature was absent, only the faint smudge of ink at the bottom. Holmes folded the slip neatly and slid it into his pocket. "There you have it, Watson. The sender of the mask is not the sender of the message. Or if he is, he suffers from a remarkable contradiction in intention. One delivers, the other demands return. Either way, it binds us to the matter more firmly than if we had sought it ourselves." I confess my heart quickened at the words, though my hand moved toward my revolver in its case. "Do you mean to keep this appointment?" I asked. He leaned back, drawing upon his pipe until the embers glowed red within. "We shall observe rather than attend. To rush into the arms of an unknown person is foolish, but to shadow him, to figure out his course, that is the true path. Tonight, Watson, we shall test whether this mask is bait for a trap or the messenger of a greater mystery." Thus the day passed, each tick of the clock dragging us closer to the unnamed hour. Outside the fog thickened, until London itself seemed to vanish behind a wall of grey. Inside the mask glowed faintly upon the mantel, as though mocking us with the silence of its copper lips. I could not get rid of the thought that in bringing it into our chambers we had invited something far more sinister than mere curiosity. And as evening drew on, I wondered not whether we should meet danger, but in what form it would first reveal itself. The night had drawn down heavily upon London, and with it came a fog so dense that even the lamps along Baker Street seemed little more than dim yellow blurs suspended in the air. Holmes and I had positioned ourselves at the window shortly before midnight, the box containing the mask locked securely within his desk. The telegram's warning still lingered in my thoughts, its urgency gnawing at me with each passing moment. Holmes, however, appeared as calm as if we were waiting for the arrival of an old friend for supper. He stood with his lean figure half lost in shadow, a silhouette framed against the shrouded panes, his pipe glowing from time to time like the eye of some watchful guard. The hour was struck by the bells of St. Marylebone. When we first saw movement in the street below, a solitary figure emerged from the vapour, tall and broad-shouldered, his steps deliberate but hesitant, as though he feared both to advance and to retreat. He paused beneath the lamplight, the glow revealing a hat pulled low and a heavy coat turned up against the damp. Even from that distance I sensed the weight of worry that clung to him. Holmes's hand lifted ever so slightly, telling me to remain still, and we watched as the stranger glanced up toward our window before stepping forward. The sound of his knock upon our door echoed hollowly through the stairwell. Mrs. Hudson's cautious steps carried her to the threshold, and within moments the man was admitted into our sitting room. He removed his hat, revealing a face drawn and pale, his eyes shifting rapidly as though he expected danger to spring from every corner. "Mr. Holmes," he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Holmes inclined his head. "Please be seated, sir. You will forgive my vigilance, but I believe you are the author of the telegram." The man started, his gaze darting to the desk where the mask lay hidden. "Then it reached you in time," he said with clear relief. "Thank God, you must listen carefully. Every moment is peril." His voice carried an accent I could not place precisely. Educated, perhaps continental, with a slight harshness upon the vowels. Holmes motioned him to the chair nearest the fire. "Begin with your name," he said gently, "for in all matters clarity must come before haste." The man hesitated, then shook his head. "My name cannot be spoken here. Too much is at stake. Already I have risked my life to warn you. That mask must be returned, destroyed if you have the means. It has brought death to every hand that held it. There are those who will stop at nothing to reclaim it." His eyes burned with an intensity that struck me with its honesty, though his refusal of identity troubled me deeply. Holmes regarded him with that piercing gaze which so often stripped the veil from lies. "You speak of peril, and yet you send the object into my very rooms. Why, if destruction is your aim, why not see to it yourself? If hiding, why involve me at all?" The man gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening. "Because only you, Mr. Holmes, can unravel the chain that binds it. Others have tried. They are gone now. I can do no more than place the truth in your keeping. There are eyes upon me even now. I dare not linger." He rose suddenly, glancing toward the door as though he had already overstayed his safety. "Sit," Holmes commanded, his tone sharpened by authority. The stranger froze, torn between obedience and flight. "You will not depart until you have told us who seeks the mask, and by what right they claim it. Speak, man. Every silence of yours deepens the darkness that surrounds this affair." The visitor's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, his gaze shifted to the window, where the fog pressed like a living wall. I thought I saw the faint shadow of another figure beyond the glass watching. The stranger shuddered violently. "They are here," he whispered. "Already they have found me." He made for the door with sudden urgency, fumbling at the handle with hands that trembled. Holmes moved swiftly, but not swiftly enough. The man had flung the door wide and plunged into the stairwell before either of us could stop him. The echo of his boots upon the steps faded into the murk of Baker Street. Holmes and I rushed after, only to be met with the solid fog outside. No sound, no trace of him remained. Holmes stood motionless, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the swirling vapor. "The gentleman may have brought us danger more swiftly than warning, Watson," he murmured, "and the fog will hide more than his escape. We are not alone in this." Holmes stepped into the street with the easy confidence of a man used to navigating both darkness and peril. I followed at his side, the damp chill of the fog seeping through my coat and clinging to my very bones. The lamps along the road offered little guidance, their glow swallowed almost at once by the heavy vapor. Somewhere to our right, the sound of carriage wheels rattled distantly, muffled as though beneath a blanket. Yet of the man who had so abruptly fled our rooms, there was no sign. Holmes stooped suddenly, his long fingers brushing along the cobblestones near the curb. He held them up for me to see, and I saw a smear of fresh mud across his gloves. He turned eastward, he said quietly. "Note the damp clay clinging here. It is from the digging near Montague Place. The man is in haste, but not without method. He chose the direction that offers the thickest cover." He straightened, his eyes narrowing into the dark. "And yet he is pursued." "Pursued?" I echoed, straining my ears. A faint scuffle, Barely more than a shuffle of boots upon stone reached us from deeper within the fog. Then silence again, too perfect, too deliberate. Holmes's hand touched my sleeve, urging caution. "There are watchers, Watson. Do not doubt it." We pressed forward slowly, but the fog thickened until I could barely see more than a pace ahead. Twice I felt certain I saw a figure slipping between the shadows, but each time it was only a trick of light upon the mist. Holmes paused often, listening, his head cocked to one side like a hound catching a distant scent. At last he drew me into the narrow shelter of a doorway. "To follow further without advantage is foolish," he said. "The man who visited us is either beyond our reach already, or has been stopped." His words hung with grim weight in the damp air. We returned to Baker Street with reluctant steps, and as the door closed behind us, I felt the strange relief of walls about me once more. Yet our chambers no longer seemed the refuge they had always been. The mask still brooded upon the mantel, its copper gleam flickering in the firelight. Somehow it appeared to mock our failure, as though it alone had known the pointlessness of our chase. Holmes dropped into his armchair, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin. "You observed his worry, Watson. Genuine, I think, and his fear was not false. Yet I would wager he carried with him as much deception as truth. He knew more than he dared speak, and his silence was as dangerous as any disclosure." "Do you think he has come to harm?" I asked. Holmes's eyes, keen even in the half-light, rested upon the mask. "If he has, then those who seek this object have moved closer than we had hoped. If he survives, he will surface again, forced either by desperation or duty. In either case, the mask is the center of gravity, about which all else must turn. It remains with us, and so long as it does, we shall not be left in peace." The clock struck 1, its chime echoing dully through the fog-bound silence outside. Holmes rose and secured the mask once more within his desk, fastening the lock with deliberate care. Then he turned to me with a faint smile that held no joy. "Rest if you can, Watson. Tomorrow the city will speak, and if we listen closely enough, its whispers may tell us what the fog has hidden." I lay awake long after he had retired, the fire dying into embers, the sound of the wind carrying faint cries from the street. I could not banish the image of that pale-faced gentleman, his eyes filled with terror, vanishing into the grey. Nor could I rid myself of the thought that someone, somewhere in that choking fog, had been waiting for him. The following morning dawned with little improvement in the weather. The fog that had lain so heavily upon Baker Street during the night continued, though the sun attempted in vain to pierce it with a watery glow. London, muffled and unclear, carried on with its restless noise beneath that ashen veil. I found Holmes already at his desk when I rose, the copper mask set before him, surrounded by scattered sheets of the day's newspapers. His eyes, bright and restless, darted across the print with the hunger of a man seeking nourishment in the thinnest of scraps. "Listen to this, Watson," he said, tapping a column in the Morning Chronicle. "Continental scholar disappears from lodgings near Charing Cross. Last seen in company of 2 gentlemen of foreign appearance." He cast the paper aside and seized another, and here the Pall Mall Gazette. Rumours circulate of a secret auction. Items of rare antiquity whispered to change hands in Soho. Observe the pattern. Scholars vanish, collectors whisper, and all within days of the arrival of our copper-faced guest. I leaned closer, noting the scattered reports. At first glance, they seemed no more than the usual mix of London's press, half gossip, half invention. Yet through Holmes's lens, they formed a sinister pattern. "Do you suppose," I asked, "that our gentleman of last night was one of these vanished scholars?" Holmes's lips curled in a thin smile. "Possible, though equally possible, he was their hunter. Fear does not always belong to the innocent." After a light breakfast, hastily eaten, Holmes declared that we should walk toward the Strand. "If whispers circulate, Watson, they will gather there. The Strand is London's artery of news, rumour, and half-secrets, flowing through offices, clubs, and taverns alike. Let us see what the city itself will tell us." We descended into the streets where the fog hung like a curtain across every view. Hansom cabs loomed suddenly from the mist, their drivers wrapped in scarves, the horses' hooves striking sparks from the stones. The cries of vendors were muffled, hollow as though echoing from some unseen cavern. Yet amidst this ghostly atmosphere, life bustled with relentless energy. By the time we reached the Strand, the fog had lifted enough to reveal the throng of clerks, errand boys, and ladies in their finery, all moving with determined haste. Holmes guided me toward a newspaper office, where he exchanged a few quiet words with an editor known to him. From there we proceeded to a smoky tavern, thick with the smell of tobacco and spilled ale. It was there in the corner near the window that Holmes told me to remain silent and listen. Two men sat at the neighboring table, their voices low but urgent. "It is certain," one whispered, "that the object has crossed the Channel. They say it rests now in London." "Fools talk," the other muttered. "No one would dare bring it here. Not after Prague, not after Vienna." "But I tell you," the first insisted. There was blood spilled already in Soho, a scholar found lifeless, his notes torn to shreds, and the sign. "Did you not hear of the sign carved upon his door?" Holmes's eyes flickered toward me, and though he said nothing, I caught the sharp glint of interest in his gaze. The men lowered their tones further, speaking now in a tongue unfamiliar to me. Harsh and guttural, though Holmes seemed to follow it with ease. He leaned back, pretending lack of interest, yet I knew his mind was capturing each syllable like a net cast wide over a rushing stream. When at last the strangers rose and departed, Holmes exhaled a long breath. "So, Watson," he murmured, "our suspicions hardened into fact. The mask's reputation runs before it, and those who pursue it have left their mark even here. Murder in Soho, vanished scholars in Charing Cross, and a sign. Yes, that intrigues me most. We must find this sign." The air in the tavern grew heavy, and I found myself glancing repeatedly toward the door, for every whisper of danger seemed to carry with it the certainty that we, too, were observed, that the copper mask had already set unseen eyes upon our trail. Holmes wasted no time once we stepped back into the noise of the Strand. The fog, though thinner now, still clung to the edges of the buildings, softening the outlines of shop fronts and street signs, lending an air of unreality to the busy road. He hailed a hansom with a sharp whistle, and within moments we were rattling towards Soho, the cab wheels splashing through puddles left by the night's damp. Holmes sat forward, his long fingers drumming lightly against the wooden edge. "The mention of a sign, Watson," he said, "is no idle fancy. When men of learning and men of crime alike hide their affairs in symbols, it is to speak in silence where words are dangerous. If this mark has been left, we must see it with our own eyes." Our driver set us down in a narrow street off Dean Street, where small lodgings pressed close together, their windows fogged and their doors streaked with grime. A constable, his face greyed beneath the brim of his helmet, stood before one such door, keeping idle onlookers at bay. Holmes produced a slip of paper bearing his name, and within moments we were admitted. The room within bore the unmistakable atmosphere of haste and violence. Papers lay scattered across the floor, their corners blackened as though someone had attempted to burn them, but been interrupted. A chair was overturned, and near the hearth a dark stain marred the carpet, hastily concealed with sand. I bent, lo, my medical eye confirming what my instincts already knew. "Blood," I whispered, "and no small quantity." Holmes barely glanced at it. His attention was fixed upon the door, where crude lines had been carved deep into the wood. At first they appeared mere scratches, but as the light fell across them, I saw a pattern, a circle intersected by 3 downward strokes, each angled like talons. Holmes traced the grooves with a gloved finger. "You see, Watson, the mark of association, a sign by which they know one another, left as both warning and claim. Whoever these men are, they do not fear discovery by the law. They fear only their rivals." His eyes gleamed with a fierce light, and now we too are marked, for knowledge is its own peril. We examined what fragments of the scholar's papers remained. Most were written in German, the script precise but hurried. Holmes sifted through them, muttering softly as he arranged them by torn edges, piecing together phrases like a puzzle. At last he held up a half sheet. "Here, listen, copper not of earthly mixture. Resonance as a voice in silence, society sworn to guard." He let the page flutter back to the desk. "It confirms what we feared. The mask is no mere trinket of antiquity. It is bound up in the designs of a society that hides itself in secrecy and perhaps in blood." As we departed, the constable gave us a wary glance, but Holmes merely touched his arm with a word of quiet instruction. "Tell your superiors nothing of the mask." The fewer who know, the safer you will be." The man nodded, more from instinctive respect for Holmes's authority than from understanding. Back in the hansom, I could not suppress the unease gnawing at me. "Holmes, if this society is so ruthless, if they kill without hesitation, should we not deliver the mask into police custody at once?" Holmes shook his head, the faintest smile upon his lips. "Lestrade is an able officer, but this lies beyond the reach of yard procedure. To place the mask in their care would be to announce its presence to every hand eager to seize it. No, Watson, we must play this game ourselves, dangerous though it be for the city whispers, and I would know what voice directs its murmurs." As our cab rattled back toward Baker Street, the fog thickened once more, swallowing the streets in its clammy embrace. I could not banish from my mind the image of that carved sign, its talon-like strokes gouged into the wood, as though some unseen claw had passed across the door, and I wondered whether we too should soon feel its mark. It was not long before Scotland Yard summoned us, though whether by Lestrade's instinct or by the inevitable reach of the whispers, I cannot say. A messenger arrived at Baker Street before noon, breathless and smudged with fog, bearing a note in Lestrade's unmistakable hand. Holmes read it with one arched brow, then handed it silently to me. "Urgent matter connected with foreign deaths and missing antiquities. Your presence required at once. Lestrade." Holmes slipped into his overcoat with quick economy. "So, Watson, our friend at the yard stirs uneasily. The tide that brushes our doorstep now laps at theirs. Let us see whether they flounder or swim." The fog clung to the embankment as our cab carried us southward, the black water of the Thames rolling sluggishly beneath the bridges. Scotland Yard loomed grey and stern against the shifting vapour, its windows glinting faintly like watchful eyes. Within, the familiar corridors echoed with the shuffle of boots and the clatter of typewriters, a rhythm of official work that seemed poorly matched to the sinister mystery that had wound itself about us. Lestrade received us in a small chamber, lined with case files, his sharp features more drawn than usual, his manner quick but edged with unease. He shook Holmes's hand, nodded curtly to me, and shut the door as though to keep the entire yard from overhearing. "It's no ordinary business, Mr. Holmes," he began. "There's talk of disappearances, foreign scholars gone missing, and a trail of artifacts vanishing across Europe. Now it has reached London. The Home Office is pressing hard, and frankly, we're at a loss." Holmes settled into a chair, his long fingers drumming lightly upon the armrest. "You speak of antiquities. Which precisely?" Lestrade opened a folder thick with notes, spreading photographs across the desk. "Masks, tablets, metalwork, pieces said to have been stolen from private collections in Vienna, Berlin, even Paris. No ordinary thieves. These robberies leave no trace. And always the same whisper follows. A circle of men bound by some secret purpose. And now, only last night, a foreign scholar in Soho is found dead, his papers destroyed, his door marked with this." He produced a sketch, the circle with 3 downward strokes identical to what Holmes and I had seen carved into the wood. I caught my breath, but Holmes betrayed no surprise. He merely inclined his head as though Lestrade had confirmed a fact long suspected. "And you suspect a society at work," he said softly. Lestrade leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Some of my men call it nonsense. Continental ghost stories. But I've seen enough, Holmes, to know it's more than fancy. Men vanish, blood is spilled, and still this sign appears. If it is nonsense, it kills as surely as truth. I'll not have London turned into their hunting ground." Holmes regarded him with quiet approval. "Your instincts, Lestrade, are sharper than your modesty admits. You are correct. There is a hand at work beyond common crime, and the object of their pursuit is already within the city." His gaze flickered briefly toward me, though he gave no further detail. Lestrade's eyes narrowed. "You know more than you've said. Out with it, Holmes. What's been delivered into London?" Holmes rose, pacing slowly across the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Patience, Inspector. Knowledge must be measured, lest it consume those who hold it. For now it's enough to say that the circle you dread is nearer than you think, and that each step we take must be weighed against the peril of awakening their full attention." Lestrade scowled, clearly dissatisfied. Yet he did not press further. Instead, he thrust a file into Holmes's hands. "Then take this. It's every disappearance, every theft, every trace we've gathered. If you can make sense of it, the Yard will be in your debt. But mark me well. If you find yourself outmatched, you'll not stand alone. I'll bring every man I've got to bear." Holmes inclined his head in grave courtesy. "That Lestrade may prove more dangerous to them than to us, for the blunt force of the Yard may yet drive them from shadow into light, and once exposed, they are no longer untouchable." As we stepped once more into the fog-choked street, I felt the weight of the file in Holmes's hand, and with it the weight of a mystery that now extended beyond our chambers, beyond Soho, into the very heart of London's order. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread Lestrade's file across our table with the precision of a surgeon laying out his instruments. The afternoon light struggled through the fog outside, casting a dull glow over the room. Sheets of witness statements, sketches of stolen artifacts and grainy photographs lay in ordered rows, each one a fragment of a wider pattern. Holmes moved swiftly among them, his eyes alive with calculation. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to one report from Berlin. "A bronze tablet stolen from a museum vault, its surface engraved with characters half Roman, half unknown. The thieves left behind no trace, save the mark of the circle with its talons." His hand shifted to another page. "Here in Vienna, a collection of masks, bronze, silver, and one said to be copper, vanished from a private estate." Again, the same sign. "And in Paris, an antiquarian found strangled, his cabinets emptied of artifacts. Each case threads the same needle. Yet the constabularies treat them as isolated thefts." I scanned the notes, a chill rising in me as I realized how consistent the pattern had been, ignored only because it sprawled across borders. "Holmes, it is as though a single hand stretches from city to city, plucking what it desires." "Precisely," he murmured, striking a match and lighting his pipe. The smoke rose slowly, mingling with the musty paper scent. "And now that hand closes upon London." But note, he tapped the Vienna report again. "Of all the stolen artifacts, only one bears resemblance to the mask upon our mantel. A copper face described by the collector as unnatural in hue, singing faintly when struck. The description is unmistakable." "Then our mask is the very one stolen abroad," I exclaimed. Holmes gave a thin smile. "So it would seem, yet consider the irony. Those who stole it across the continent now seek its return, and by secret means. Why send it to me only to threaten and pursue? That contradiction, Watson, is the key." Evening fell as he spoke, the street lamps glowing faintly through the fog like distant stars. I could not shake the feeling that we were no longer mere observers, but actors upon a stage watched by hidden eyes. Each shuffle in the street below, each shadow that lingered too long, set my nerves on edge. Holmes, however, seemed energized by the danger. He leaned across the table, his voice low but steady. "This society, this circle, does not kill randomly. Their murders are precise, their thefts deliberate. They guard knowledge that most men would dismiss as myth. If the copper mask lies at their center, then by possessing it we hold both bait and weapon. We must tread carefully, for every step will draw them nearer." He closed the file with a firm hand, locking it within his drawer beside the mask itself. "Lestrade is uneasy, and rightly so. Yet Scotland Yard cannot untangle this knot. It falls to us, Watson. Already the noose tightens. We must be ready when it draws closed." As he spoke, a knock sounded below, sharp and insistent against the wood. Mrs. Hudson's voice called faintly up the stair, announcing an unexpected caller. Holmes rose swiftly, a gleam in his eyes that was half anticipation, half forewarning. "The game advances, Watson. Let us see which piece has moved upon the board." Our unexpected visitor proved to be no messenger of menace, but rather a nervous clerk sent from the British Museum. His cap was clutched tightly in both hands, and his voice shook as he explained that his superiors, having heard whispers of Holmes's involvement in a case concerning antiquities, begged his immediate consultation. Holmes, ever quick to hide both amusement and irritation, listened without interruption, then agreed to attend that very afternoon. "The museum's walls have absorbed centuries of secrets, Watson," he said as we prepared to depart. "If the copper mask bears any code of learning or superstition, it is there we may discover the first glimmer of its meaning." The fog had lifted slightly by the time our cab rattled along Great Russell Street, though the sky remained a flat sheet of grey. The museum's massive front loomed against it, stern and timeless, its stone columns like guards keeping watch over the city's hoard of knowledge. Inside, the galleries lay hushed, the usual throng of visitors thinned by the dreariness of the day. We were conducted swiftly to a chamber in the eastern wing, where a senior curator awaited us, amidst cases of relics. He was a tall, lean man, with the paleness of one who lived more among manuscripts than in daylight. He bowed courteously to Holmes, then his eyes fastened upon the box Holmes carried beneath his arm. "You have brought it," he said with something of awe. "Please set it here." Holmes placed the mask upon the green cloth of a long table. The curator bent over it, his fingers trembling as he traced the faint inscriptions half hidden beneath the green layer. "Remarkable," he whispered. "I have read of such markings only in the scattered notes of alchemists, never upon an object itself." Holmes lit a lamp and adjusted the flame until its glow fell across the copper surface. The engravings, barely visible in the daylight, sprang into sharper relief beneath the focused light. They formed no language known to me, but rather a series of interwoven lines and symbols, circles within circles intersected by delicate strokes. "Do you recognize them?" Holmes asked. The curator shook his head slowly. "Not as a complete script, yet here, this spiral resembles the symbols used by certain hermetic societies of the 15th century, and this," he tapped a triangle crossed by a single line. "I have seen it in treatises upon resonance, the study of sound as force. It is as though this object marries superstition with experiment." Holmes regarded him keenly. "Then you believe it was fashioned with intent, not mere ornament?" "Most certainly." "The alloy itself is odd. Copper, yes, but tinged with something else, a mixture I cannot identify at a glance. I should wish to subject it to testing, though I fear the attempt might damage it." Holmes forbade the notion with a curt gesture. "The mask must remain unaltered, but your observations are of value. If the code binds science and superstition, then those who pursue it may not be mere collectors. They seek to wield it." As the curator bent once more over the mask, Holmes leaned near and whispered in my ear, "Do you hear, Watson? We have stumbled not merely upon theft or murder, but upon an idea, a notion dangerous enough to inspire both. That is the true peril of the copper mask. Its power may lie less in what it is than in what men believe it to be." I could not deny the truth of his words, for even as I gazed upon that silent face of copper, I felt a strange vibration it seemed to carry, the faint hum as though a whisper lingered just beneath hearing. Whether born of alloy or of imagination, it unsettled me deeply. Holmes, with the mask now returned to its box, pressed the curator for further counsel. "Tell me," he said, "have there been visitors to this institution making inquiries of such artifacts? Foreign gentlemen, perhaps, whose curiosity exceeded the ordinary bounds of scholarship?" The curator's thin face tightened. "Indeed, there have, only a week past. 2 men, tall, dark in complexion, and speaking with a harsh, guttural accent, demanded access to our restricted manuscripts. They sought volumes on metalworking and sound, yet their manner betrayed no genuine learning. When I questioned their credentials, they withdrew at once, leaving behind the sense that they would find their answers elsewhere by other means. I notified the yard, but little was done." Holmes's eyes glimmered with satisfaction. "And now those same men circle London in pursuit of this mask. Their persistence speaks to purpose, their silence to conspiracy." He closed the box firmly and slipped it once more beneath his arm. "You have been of service, sir. Should these gentlemen return, do nothing to alarm them, but make note of every detail. It may prove vital." We took our leave, but not before Holmes cast one last glance at the cases of relics lining the gallery walls. "Observe, Watson," he murmured as we stepped back into the damp street. "Every artifact here tells of men who sought meaning beyond the ordinary. Priests, alchemists, philosophers. Some found knowledge, others delusion. The copper mask may rest upon that very boundary, half in science, half in superstition. It is enough to draw both scholar and criminal alike into its orbit." The cab ride back to Baker Street was silent, save for the rattle of wheels and the hiss of fog against the lamps. I pondered his words with growing unease. If men were willing to kill in Prague, Vienna, and Soho for the mask, what disaster might yet unfold in London? Holmes, seated opposite me, seemed absorbed in thought, his gaze fixed upon the box as though he were listening to some inner rhythm I could not hear. When at last we returned to our chambers, he wasted no time in setting the mask upon the table once more. From a drawer he produced a small tuning fork, struck it lightly and held it near the copper face. To my astonishment, the mask gave a faint answering hum, so soft I might have dismissed it as fancy had I not seen Holmes's sharp nod of confirmation. "There lies the code, Watson," he said, his voice low in intent. "The mask resonates not only with light but with sound. The inscriptions may well correspond to frequencies, each symbol a note in some hidden scale. Whether this was wrought by design or stumbled upon by accident, I cannot yet say, but it is no inert relic. It answers to the world about it." I felt a shiver pass through me, as though the very air of our sitting room had quickened with invisible energy. "And those who seek it?" I asked. Holmes looked up, his eyes gleaming through the haze of his pipe smoke. "They believe it holds a secret worth blood and ruin. Whether that secret be true or false, it will drive them to our very door. Mark my words, Watson, we stand at the threshold of revelation, and beyond it lies a peril neither of us has yet faced." The clock struck 7, its chime echoing through the fog outside. I could not tell whether it sounded like a warning or a summons. The fog that night lay heavier still upon London, as though the city had drawn a curtain over its own face. Holmes had decided that we should meet the informant, whose message, passed through a circuit of whispers, promised knowledge of the mask's true history. The chosen place was a tavern near the river docks, a haunt of sailors and night traders, where the air smelled of salt, tar, and cheap gin. It was a setting most unlike the cultivated salons of our usual visitors, and yet Holmes seemed to embrace the oddity with quiet eagerness. We set out shortly before 9, Holmes with the box beneath his arm and I with my revolver close at hand. The hansom carried us through streets where gas lamps burned like pale islands in a sea of mist. Figures loomed and vanished. Whispers followed us, and the wheels of the cab struck hollow upon the stones. At length the driver stopped before a narrow building leaning toward the water, its signboard swinging faintly in the damp air. A dull yellow glow escaped from within, mingled with the sound of coarse laughter and the scrape of fiddles. Holmes pushed open the door and we entered a chamber thick with smoke and the stench of stale beer. Men lounged at the tables, their faces ruddy from drink, their eyes narrowing as strangers crossed the threshold. Holmes moved without hesitation toward a corner table where a solitary figure awaited us. The man was cloaked, his hat brim drawn low, his hands hidden beneath his cloak. He did not rise as we approached, but his voice carried clearly when he spoke. "You have it," he said, "not a question but a statement, heavy with certainty." Holmes seated himself opposite, laying the box upon the table between them. "We have it," he replied evenly. "But knowledge, sir, is the currency we deal in. If you would speak of the mask, you must pay in truth." The man shifted slightly, and I glimpsed a lean jaw, the shadow of a scar running from ear to chin. His voice was low, urgent. "The mask is older than the cities that coveted it. Fashioned by hands that sought to bind sound and spirit, it has passed through empires as both treasure and curse. Those who wear it hear more than mortal voices. Some say it sings with the memory of the dead. Others that it is but an instrument built for purposes of science now lost to us. What I know is this: every brotherhood that has possessed it has spilled blood to keep it." I felt a coldness steal over me at his words, though Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "And the society that now pursues it in London?" he asked. The man's hand trembled upon the table. "They call themselves guardians, but they are nothing less than jailers of knowledge. They will not permit the mask to fall into unmeasured hands. If you hold it, they will come. If you yield it, they will silence you. Already their eyes are upon you both." Holmes leaned forward, his voice quickening. "Why warn us then? If you are of their circle, you betray them. If not, you mark yourself for death by speaking at all." The man's answer came with a bitterness that cut like steel, because I was once of them, and now I'm cast out. I know what they are, what they will do. I would see their hold broken, even if it costs my life. He glanced sharply toward the door, his body tense as though listening. Even now they are near. I should not have lingered. At that moment the door creaked open, and 2 men stepped into the tavern. Their coats were heavy, their hats pulled low, their movements too precise for drunken sailors. One swept the room with a swift glance, his eyes fastening upon our corner. The other's hand slid beneath his coat. The scarred man hissed through his teeth, "It is too late!" "They have come." The tavern seemed to still in that instant, though the fiddle scraped on and voices murmured in the haze of smoke. Holmes's hand moved swiftly, sliding the box back toward me beneath the table. "Keep it close, Watson," he whispered. His eyes never left the two figures advancing through the press of sailors and dockmen. The scarred man rose half from his chair, his cloak falling back to reveal a narrow blade glinting at his side. "They will not let me leave alive," he muttered. His eyes burned with a fatal resolve. "But you, keep the mask from them." Holmes's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with iron force. "No rash moves," he said sharply. "Violence will draw the whole den upon us." Yet the intruders were already upon us. The taller of the two inclined his head slightly toward Holmes, his lips curling in a smile that held no warmth. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his accent thick, each syllable deliberate, "London whispers much of your talents. Return what is not yours, and we may part as friends." Holmes did not rise. He regarded the man with cool detachment, his grey eyes glinting through the lamplight. "And what is not mine, sir?" The second man's hand rested upon his coat, where the outline of a pistol bulged faintly. "You know well. The mask does not belong to you." The scarred man beside us snarled. "Nor to you, jackals. It was forged before your masters ever drew breath." With sudden fury, he flung back his chair and drew his knife. Chaos erupted. The taller intruder lunged, the pistol flashing in the lamplight. I heard the crack of wood as a bullet buried itself in the wall above us. The tavern's patrons roared in alarm, some fleeing, others rising in drunken rage at the intrusion. Holmes moved like quicksilver, seizing a tankard from the table and hurling it into the gunman's wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor amid shouts and curses. I had already drawn my revolver, my hand steady despite the chaos. "Stay where you are," I barked, though my voice was nearly drowned by the uproar. The taller man froze, his smile vanishing into a snarl. The scarred man grappled with the second, their struggle overturning tables and scattering bottles. Holmes's hand caught my shoulder. "Enough, Watson. Out," he commanded. With a swift motion, he pulled the box from my grasp, tucking it beneath his arm. He shoved me toward the side door, his voice cutting through the den. "Now." We burst into the night, the fog swallowing us at once. Behind us, cries and curses rang from the tavern, followed by the crash of splintering glass. Holmes darted into a narrow lane, his long legs carrying him with astonishing speed. I followed, breath burning in my throat, the cobblestones slick beneath my boots. Only when we had twisted through 3 successive alleys did Holmes pause, pressing his back against the damp brick wall. He listened intently, his chest rising and falling with quick breaths. The sounds of pursuit faded, swallowed by the endless murmur of the river and the hiss of fog. "The game is fully joined now, Watson," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the chase. "They know we hold the mask. They will not cease until they have it, or until they are themselves destroyed." I wiped the damp from my brow, my heart still pounding. "And the scarred man, do you think he escaped?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "If he lives, he may yet find us. If not, then his warning is sealed in blood. Either way, the copper mask has drawn its circle tighter around us." We made our way back toward Baker Street, the mask hidden once more beneath Holmes's coat. Yet I could not rid myself of the image of that tavern, of steel flashing, of eyes burning in the lamplight, and of a presence greater than men pressing invisibly upon us. It seemed to me that London itself had grown complicit, its fog and shadows conspiring to cloak both hunter and hunted alike. The following day dawned bleak and colourless, as though the fog of the previous nights had seeped into the very sky. Holmes was already at work when I emerged from my chamber, the remnants of telegrams scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. His dressing gown hung loosely about him, and the air was heavy with the strong smoke of his pipe. Upon the table, maps of Europe lay unfurled, dotted with his notations in neat angular script. "You see, Watson," he said without introduction, "the copper mask has not drifted into our hands by accident. It has a history, long, bloody, and precise. I have traced its path, as one might trace the movements of an army. To here, Prague, a collector found strangled in his library, his cabinets emptied. Here, Vienna, an estate plundered, the copper face carried away with jewels and manuscripts. Paris follows, where an antiquarian was found dead beneath the Seine, his papers scattered upon the bank. Each city marks a step in its pilgrimage, and now the trail has led surely to London." He gestured for me to examine a series of telegrams. They were responses from his network of informants abroad, each reporting thefts, deaths, or whispered transactions. In every case, the description of the missing artifact bore the same refrain. A mask of copper, dull yet strangely glowing, inscribed with symbols none could decipher. Holmes bent over one particular telegram from Paris, his finger resting upon a line. This one speaks of a meeting of occultists in the Rue Saint-Jacques, where the mask was displayed as an object of ritual. That gathering was broken by violence, and the mask vanished again. You see the pattern. Each possession ends in blood, each transfer cloaked in secrecy. It is less the object itself than the madness it provokes in men. I felt a weight settle upon me as I read the dark accounts of scholars lost, of families ruined by theft, of whispers in salons where men debated not whether the mask was valuable, but whether it was cursed. "Holmes," I said, "if the thing is truly so dangerous, should we not destroy it at once? Surely fire or acid or even the hammer might work." Holmes shook his head with that familiar impatience he reserved for notions he deemed too early. "You mistake the problem, Watson. To destroy what one does not understand is to invite disaster. If the alloy resists ordinary means, you may only strengthen the legend, feeding the very superstition that drives men to madness. No, knowledge first, action after. We must see the trail to its root." He turned back to his maps, tracing a line eastward. "There are darker hints yet. From Prague, the whisper moves further still to Krakow, to the fringes of the Carpathians, where certain brotherhoods keep their secrets with fire and steel. The society we have glimpsed here in London has roots abroad, and their reach is long indeed. The scarred man in the tavern was but a fragment torn from that larger body." The notion unsettled me deeply. The fog beyond our window seemed no longer merely the breath of the river, but a veil drawn over unseen armies, moving toward us. "And what of the yard?" I asked. "Surely Lestrade must be told of this trail." Holmes dismissed the idea with a flick of his hand. "Lestrade is useful, but the yard is bound by borders and papers. This is a matter that goes beyond both. To bring them in now would be to alert our adversaries of our knowledge. No, Watson. Our task is to pursue the truth until it can no longer be hidden even from itself." He folded the maps with sudden finality, his eyes flashing with resolve. "The Continental Trail lies beneath our feet already, for those who walked it now stalk London's alleys. Let us meet them upon our own ground, but with the full knowledge of their journey. Only then shall we turn their pursuit against them." Holmes set to work with the obsessive clarity that ever marked his pursuits. He sent a series of careful telegrams to trusted correspondents in Prague and Vienna, each worded in the language of scholarship, so as to draw replies without raising alarm. I watched him write, his long hand neat as ever, as though each phrase might yet turn the tide. Within hours the replies began to arrive, cryptic, dark and threaded with the same note of dread. An antiquary in Prague spoke of a convent cellar, where monks had once hidden relics, and muttered of a metal that cried when struck. A Viennese librarian recalled a traveller who spoke in sleep of mountains where iron ran like water. These were not mere coincidences, but tributaries feeding a single, more terrible river. We pieced together routes, names, and half-remembered meetings, auctions held in shadow, ships that carried crates unstamped across borders, and a procession of go-betweens who trafficked not merely in goods but in memory and rumour. Holmes read each message as a man reads a map of battle, seeking the enemy's line of march by the pattern of their supply. "They do not trade like merchants," he observed. "They barter in secrecy and superstition alike. The mask is their lodestone, and men will circle it until they are ground to dust." My physician's mind could not help but wonder at the psychology of such devotion. What quality in an inert face of metal could compel learned men, hardened criminals, and secretive orders to risk murder and ruin? Holmes answered in a way that was part observation and part pity. "Belief is itself a force, Watson. It warps judgment, alters measure. Give a man the notion that an object can deliver a truth or power, and he will stake his honor and his life to clutch it." His voice softened, not unkindly. "This is the human element that makes our task both tragic and necessary." As evening folded into night, a reply came that changed our course. A courier from Prague named a meeting place, an obscure house in Bloomsbury, where a foreign collector often stayed when in England. The note hinted that a fragment of the mask's origin story might be shown if we were careful and swift. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "There is the thread we must pull," he said. "Follow where it leads, and perhaps we shall see the loom at work." We took a cab to the address named, moving through streets where lamps fought the fog with little success. The house in Bloomsbury was narrow and respectable, its curtains drawn tight against the chill. A porter admitted us after Holmes presented himself as a scholar of metalworking, and we were conducted into a back room where a man of middle years awaited, his accent thinly Viennese and his fingers stained with ink. He spoke in whispers of an ancient order that had collected instruments of resonance bells, tuning forks, metal faces used in ritual. They sought to harness a voice, he said, a vibration that would call across the barrier between curiosity and terror. His eyes flicked to Holmes. If you would see the past, come with caution. Men die for less. Holmes listened, his profile composed yet keen, then leaned back with that small, rare smile of his. We shall take your caution, sir, but we shall also take your counsel. Show us what you can. For knowledge that is hoarded in fear becomes the weapon of the coward. The collector's hand trembled as he placed before us a handful of brittle papers and a small brass token stamped with the same talon-like device we had seen carved in Soho. It was, to my eyes, as damning as an indictment. To Holmes it was the map to a conspiracy. We left the house that night with new names upon our tongues and a longer list of those who would not rest until the mask was recovered. The Continental Trail had yielded a glimpse of its origin, fragments of a doctrine that married sound and symbol, and men determined to enforce its secrecy. As we walked back toward Baker Street, through fog that seemed now to press with intent, I felt the thin line of safety that once separated us from the world fray and thin. Holmes carried the papers with careful hands, the light from his cigar catching the edges like tiny stars. Soon, he said, not boastful but certain, we will see whether this myth is brittle as glass or hard as iron. Until then, we must be watchful and ready. Holmes's prediction proved grimly accurate. Within 2 days, signs of the hidden brotherhood began to surface in London with alarming clarity. The first clue arrived in the form of a newspaper clipping, delivered anonymously through our letterbox. It reported the discovery of a body pulled from the Thames near Blackfriars Bridge. A foreigner of unknown origin, his hands scarred, his chest branded with the same talon-like device we had seen etched upon the Soho door. The article made only brief mention of the matter, but Holmes's eyes lingered long upon the words, and when he raised his head, the fire of pursuit burned brightly in them. The society begins to show its face, he murmured, and London is its theatre as much as Prague or Vienna. The sign is no longer whispered. It is written upon the bodies of its enemies. Later that afternoon, we received a visitor, a pale and nervous lawyer, whose firm had once handled the affairs of a continental gentleman, now presumed dead. He brought with him a packet of papers, sealed but clearly tampered with, which had been discovered in his late client's effects. Among them was a fragment of parchment, bearing the circle and talons drawn with ceremonial care. Beneath it a motto in Latin, Silentium Custodimus, we guard silence. Holmes examined the script with grave attention. The Silent Society, Watson, a brotherhood that cloaks its purpose beneath the veil of secrecy. Their creed is not to proclaim but to suppress. They do not flaunt possession, they erase it. We ventured out that evening, Holmes leading me through the narrow streets of Soho, where whispers flowed more freely than daylight. In a dim cafe frequented by emigrants and anarchists, he exchanged hushed words with a figure I did not recognize. Over steaming cups of bitter coffee, Holmes listened, his face unreadable, while the man spoke of gatherings held in shuttered rooms, of members masked and hooded, of chants that blended mathematics with prayer. It was said that the society's reach extended into universities, cabinets of government, even the press itself. When at last we emerged into the misted night, Holmes spoke only one sentence. They are everywhere, Watson, and nowhere. That is their strength. I felt the fog curl about us like the very breath of secrecy itself. To know that such a network existed, hidden in plain sight, unsettled me more deeply than any single act of violence. For an enemy one may face, but a society that is unseen, its members indistinguishable from ordinary men, is a shadow without form. Back at Baker Street, Holmes set the mask once more upon the mantel. Its copper face glimmered faintly in the lamplight, the undecipherable symbols seeming almost to shift in the glow. This, Watson, he said quietly, is the stone that troubles their silence. They will come for it with persistence beyond reason. To hold it is to hold their very secret in our hands. He stood long before it, pipe in hand, his profile cut sharp against the smoke. For my part, I could not rid myself of the sense that unseen eyes watched even through our very walls, that the silent society, true to its name, moved soundlessly about us, drawing their circle ever tighter. The days that followed were a measured succession of small violences and quieter discoveries. A clerk at the Admiralty reported a catalogue of crates mysteriously mislabeled and redirected. A bookseller on Fleet Street confessed that a parcel of rare treatises had been purchased at a price far beyond their market value, paid for in cash and secrecy. And a young academic from King's College arrived at Baker Street with wild eyes and a single sentence. They recruit beneath the very lecture halls, Watson, and smile as they pass you in the street. Each fragment fitted to the others like a shard of glass, finding its place in a wrecked mirror. Holmes collected them all with that calm that in his hands always felt like strategy rather than surrender. One evening, as the gaslight flared thinly through our window, a new and more solid threat made itself known. A note, slipped beneath our door and bearing the talon mark in a flourish of red ink, lay upon our hearth. No words accompanied it, only the symbol and a single hour, midnight. The boldness of such a summons, so close, so precise, was itself a message. They knew where we lived. They wished us to understand that distance and secrecy were not shields, but invitations. Holmes folded the note carefully and set it among his papers as if it were an exhibit to be examined under the lens of reason. "They test us," he said quietly, "to see how we will answer. We held no meeting in the open, no clumsy defiance in public. Instead, Holmes arranged a circle of precaution. Trusted friends, whose names and faces he uttered, but whose movements he could direct beneath the veil of normalcy. A locksmith on the Strand changed our bolts. A clerk at the post office watched for parcels bearing foreign marks, and Lestrade, though kept at arm's length from the secret of the mask itself, agreed to double the watch on river traffic. All measures were small and practical, yet they steadied me as well as they steadied the household. For in the presence of an invisible society, habit and order become in themselves acts of resistance. That midnight we made no show of bravery. Holmes and I sat by the mantel, the mask between us, and listened to the city breathe. The hours crept slow as prisoners, each minute measured against the tick of the clock. At 11 a carriage rolled past our door and then drew up. Distant voices murmured. Footsteps approached the stair. I rose not from some notion of heroism, but because action is better than dread. Holmes moved as he always moves, calm, swift, economical, his figure a dark thing among shadows. A single knock came upon our door, 3 short, 1 long, an odd rhythm that might have been a code. Holmes opened but left the chain in place. A voice cultivated and metallic spoke from the corridor. "Mr. Holmes, a gentleman seeks your counsel in matters of antiquity." Holmes answered with such bland courtesy as sent no alarm. Yet beneath his words I sensed the trap being weighed. "We shall receive him," he said, and I felt in that moment how theatre may serve the ends of truth. The visitor was led in, cloaked but unmasked, his bearing that of a man who had been schooled in every salon of Europe. He removed his hat with a politeness that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Holmes," he began. There was no preface to his intent. He took the seat offered and spoke not as suppliant but as judge. "You possess an object that concerns my order. Return it and no more blood need be spilled. Keep it, and you will discover that silence may be enforced by means less merciful than speech." His hand rested upon the table, and the talon device glinted upon a ring he wore. Holmes listened, his face the map of patience. When at last he answered, it was not with anger but with a statement of fact. "We are not possessed so much as informed, sir. Knowledge is not theft when it aids in preventing harm. If your society protects the public, show us proof rather than threaten us with shadows." The gentleman's mouth tightened, and for a moment I watched the meeting of 2 different kinds of conviction. One that believed in secrecy as protection, the other that believed in light as remedy. The man rose, and though he left our rooms under an outward politeness, his parting glance carried the weight of an unspoken promise. He had come to claim, to warn, and to measure the resolve of the 2 men who would not yield. As he departed into the fog, Holmes replaced the mask upon the mantel and turned to me with a sentence that felt to me like a verdict and a blessing. "They desire control rather than guardianship, Watson. The silent guard keeps neither peace nor honor. It keeps fear. We must be ready to compel them into visibility, or to outlast their patience." Thus closed another circle in the chase. The silent society had shown its hand and offered the city its choice. Submission to a secrecy sealed by blood, or the slow clearing of that secrecy by method and courage. We stood then at that narrow ledge between compliance and exposure, and as the fog curled about Baker Street like a living thing, I could not help but wonder which course London would permit. The city seemed to hum with an unseen pulse as the day of reckoning approached. Whispers carried through the cafes of Soho and the parlours of Mayfair alike. Rumours of a gathering, a ceremony cloaked in secrecy, where the copper mask would be honoured and its meaning unveiled. Holmes had pieced the threads together from scraps of overheard conversation, coded notices in the back columns of foreign newspapers, and the trembling confessions of men who feared their own words. The night chosen was one of storm, and London lay beneath a sky torn by lightning, the rain drumming a steady march upon the pavements. Holmes was tireless in his preparations. He secured from Lestrade a quiet approval to move unseen, though without disclosure of the true prize. A handful of trusted constables would linger within call, but the greater burden would rest upon ourselves. If we bring too many, Holmes said, the quarry will scatter. If we go too few, we may be consumed. Thus the balance of the hunt. His eyes glittered in the lamplight, a predator's calm sharpened by intellect. Toward midnight, we made our way to the appointed place, a disused warehouse by the river, its windows shuttered, its doors reinforced with iron. From without it appeared abandoned, but from within came a faint glow, an eerie copper-like light that seemed to flicker like fire through the cracks. We slipped into the shadows, moving along the wet stone wall until Holmes found a side entrance, its lock corroded with rust. With skillful fingers he coaxed it open, and we stole into the blackness within. The air was thick with the smell of oil and damp timber. From beyond a partition came the murmur of voices, low and rhythmic, joined together in a rhythm, half chant, half calculation. Holmes signalled for silence, and we crept forward until a gap in the boards revealed the hall beyond. What I beheld chilled me to the bone. A circle of men, their faces hooded, stood about a great iron brazier. Upon it lay the copper mask, its surface glowing faintly as though it drank the fire. The light that filled the chamber was unnatural, shifting from red to green to a pale, unearthly white that seemed to light up the symbols carved upon its surface. Each man in the circle raised a hand in unison, their voices blending into a resonance that made the very boards beneath us tremble. It was no mere ritual of superstition. It bore the precision of experiment, as though the mask itself were an instrument played by human breath and flame. I felt my heart pound, torn between awe and dread. Holmes's face, half lit by the spectral glow, was grave and intent, his eyes fixed upon the mask with an intensity that betrayed no fear yet confessed the weight of discovery. For here in this hidden chamber, belief and science had indeed met, and whether the result was illusion or revelation, it held power enough to bind men's lives in silence and blood. Holmes's hand tightened upon my arm. He whispered in the barest breath, "Now we see the heart of it, Watson, and it is more dangerous than I imagined." The chanting swelled until it seemed the very rafters shook with the vibration. The mask upon the brazier glowed brighter, its inscriptions flaring as if lit from within. For an instant I thought I heard a low moan, not human but metallic, as though the copper itself had found voice. The sound crawled along my nerves, filling me with a dread that no battlefield had ever instilled. Holmes leaned closer, his whisper urgent in my ear. "It is resonance, Watson. The flame heats the alloy. The chant supplies vibration. They believe they call forth spirit, but it is sound made visible." His words, though rational, did little to still the chill coursing through me. For whatever its explanation, the effect was uncanny, and the men around the brazier stood transfixed, their voices rising in perfect unison. Suddenly, the scarred man we had met in the tavern burst from the shadows of the chamber. His cloak flared as he strode into the circle, his knife glinting in the copper light. "You fools," he cried. "It was never meant to be wielded. You summon death upon us all." His voice cracked the rhythm, and for a moment the chant faltered, but the hooded figures closed in upon him, their formation unbroken. One seized his arm, another struck his blade aside, and in the struggle that followed, I saw the brazier totter, sparks scattering across the boards. Holmes moved with sudden decision. He pushed open the panel before us, and we plunged into the chamber. "Enough," he thundered, his voice carrying like a command on parade. For a heartbeat the circle wavered, their chant dying into silence. All eyes turned upon Holmes, who stood tall, the firelight catching his sharp features, his presence arresting as though he too commanded ritual. I had my revolver in hand, trained upon the nearest of the hooded men. "Stand back," I barked, though my voice seemed feeble against the weight of the silence that fell. The scarred man staggered free, blood upon his brow, and clutched at Holmes's arm. "Stop them," he gasped, "before it is too late." Holmes's gaze fixed upon the mask, which now glowed as though some inner flame devoured it. With swift precision, he seized the brazier's handle and overturned it. The fire hissed upon the stone floor, sparks vanishing into smoke. The mask fell with a ringing clang, rolling to rest at my feet. Its glow faded, leaving only dull copper once more. A cry of rage rose from the society, their hooded forms closing upon us. But at that instant, the door behind us crashed open, and Lestrade with half a dozen constables surged in, their truncheons raised. The chamber erupted into struggle. Shouts, blows, the clash of steel. I fired a shot above the heads of the crowd, the report echoing like thunder, scattering the courage of those who had not expected the law's arrival. The fight was swift and furious, but the Brotherhood, seeing their ritual broken and their secrecy pierced, fled into the night. Some were seized by Lestrade's men. Others vanished into the fog, their cloaks whipping behind them. The scarred man, trembling and spent, sank to his knees, his eyes fixed upon the mask with a mixture of loathing and despair. Holmes lifted it once more, holding it in both hands, his face unreadable. "It is finished for tonight, Watson," he said softly, though his voice carried no triumph. "But the flame we have put out may yet smoulder in other places. The mask has not spoken its last." As we left the ruined chamber, the storm outside broke in earnest. Rain poured upon the streets, washing the blood and ashes into the Thames. Yet in the rolling thunder above, I fancied I heard an echo of that uncanny hum, as though London itself had taken the resonance into its bones. The dawn that followed was a pale and weary thing, filtering through a sky still heavy with the remnants of the storm. Baker Street lay quiet, the clatter of carts muffled by rain-slicked cobblestones. Holmes had not slept. I found him at the window, the copper mask upon the table beside him, its surface dull now, stripped of the unnatural glow I had seen in the warehouse. He looked thin in the wan light, his features drawn not by fatigue alone, but by the weight of a truth not yet spoken. By mid-morning, Lestrade arrived, his boots leaving wet prints upon our carpet. He carried with him a prisoner, none other than the scarred man who had first warned us in the tavern. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, but his eyes burned with that same desperate fire. "He demanded to see you," Lestrade muttered, clearly mistrustful. "Says he'll speak to no one else." Holmes gestured for the man to sit, and with a curt nod Lestrade withdrew, leaving us three together in the quiet room. The scarred man leaned forward, his hands trembling upon his knees. "I have little time," he began, his voice rough. "Your constables will not hold me long, nor should they, for I am less a criminal than a witness to a chain of crimes older than myself." His eyes fixed upon the mask, and I saw hatred in them mingled with sorrow. It was I who bore it from Vienna, I who smuggled it through Paris and delivered it at last to your very rooms, and I who set in motion the storm that now surrounds you. I felt a start of anger. "Then all this blood, these deaths lie at your feet." He shook his head fiercely. "No, Doctor. The blood was already flowing long before. I sought only to break the circle, to drag their secret into light. The mask is no relic of power. It is an experiment abandoned, a tool whose meaning was lost. But they, those I once called brothers, turned ignorance into fear, fear into ritual, and ritual into chains. I could bear it no longer. I sent it to Holmes, knowing that if any man could strip away their veil, it would be he." Holmes had not moved, but his eyes never wavered from the man's face. "And what is the truth stripped of veil?" he asked quietly. The scarred man drew a long breath. "The mask was wrought centuries ago by a guild of artisans who believed sound could shape matter. They fashioned faces of metal to catch the resonance of voice and flame, to test whether vibration itself might break stone or bend will. But the experiment failed. The knowledge was buried. The artisans scattered. Only fragments endured, whispers, symbols, and this solitary mask. The silent society rose not to protect mankind from it, but to preserve their control over the tale. They keep silence not for safety, but for power. So long as men believe the mask is terrible, they remain its masters." I felt a surge of disgust at the cold clarity of his words. Holmes, however, leaned back, his hands pressed together, and his voice was calm. And you broke from them. Why confess now? The man's gaze softened, the fire dimming into weariness. Because I know I shall not live to see them fall. They will come for me, whether in jail or upon the street. My life is forfeit, but you, Holmes, you may yet finish what I could not. Expose them, strip their silence of its mask, and let the world see them for what they are. He bowed his head then, as though a weight had at last slipped from his shoulders. The room was silent save for the steady tick of the clock. For some minutes after the scarred man had spoken, none of us stirred. The fire crackled faintly in the grate, casting a dim glow upon the copper face that lay upon our table. Holmes at last rose and placed the mask back into its box, fastening the clasp with deliberate care. Only then did he address our visitor. "You have unburdened yourself," Holmes said evenly, "but confessions, however solemn, are but one form of testimony. Proof must follow, or your words will vanish into rumor like smoke into fog. Give us names, dates, places, anything that can be set against their silence." The man lifted his head, his eyes hollow but steady. "In Vienna seek the records of Baron Adelhoff. His estate was the true vault from which the mask was taken. In Paris, the Rue Saint-Jacques holds papers still hidden beneath the floorboards of a shuttered print shop. And in London he faltered, his breath catching. In London, one among your own press his oath with them. You will know him by the ring he wears, the talon mark upon his hand. Trust no voice that calls too eagerly for secrecy." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "It is enough. You have done what you could." The man sagged back in his chair, a faint sigh escaping his lips. "Then my task is ended." His gaze shifted toward me, and for an instant the hard lines of his face softened. "Doctor, you are a man of honor. Bear witness if I do not survive the day." I could not answer. Words seemed feeble against the raw finality of his tone. Lestrade returned soon after, his manner quick, his face lined with suspicion. "Well, Holmes, what say you? A confession worth the ink or the ravings of a rogue?" Holmes closed the box and handed it to me. "A confession that bears the stamp of truth, Inspector. You may keep the man under watch, but do not dismiss his words. Within them lies the key to a society that slays beneath our very eyes." Lestrade muttered something about foreign conspiracies and thin evidence, but he obeyed, escorting the scarred man from our rooms with unexpected gentleness. The door closed and silence returned. Holmes stood long by the window, the fog outside lifting at last into a pale, reluctant dawn. "You see, Watson," he said, his voice low, "the mask itself is no miracle, no sorcery. It is the mirror of human folly, of men who mistake shadow for substance, silence for strength. They have killed for a thing they do not understand, and in so doing, they have built a legend that will outlive them." He turned to me then, and though his face was calm, I saw the weight of weariness upon it. "It remains to us, my friend, to ensure that truth is told, not merely whispered. The copper mask must pass into history, not as relic nor as terror, but as caution." I set down these words with a hand that trembled, not from fear alone, but from the knowledge that I had looked upon the dark machinery of secrecy itself, and seen how men will bow to it or break beneath it. Whether the silent society will vanish or return, I cannot say. But I know this: the mask lies locked now where no hand may wield it, and Holmes, with his keen eye and unyielding reason, has turned yet another darkness into light. And yet, even as I write, I cannot forget that sound, faint and metallic, that seemed to linger in the warehouse air when the mask was set to flame. Was it merely vibration, as Holmes insists, or something older, stranger, that mocked us from within the copper? Of that I shall not speak further, for some mysteries, once touched, leave an echo that no man can silence.